Today we are finally going to integrate authentication into our WPF project. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm so excited that I put together some Visio diagrams to go over what we're going to be doing in this episode. And I really hope that we can get a view model and a view going. The view is probably not going to look that pretty at first, but we're at least going to get the functionality. So to implement this authentication, we're going to need an authenticator, and this is going to be an object that will handle authentication and handle the current authentication state. So it's going to have the current user, and it's going to tell us if a user is logged in. So of course that authenticator is going to be state for our WPF application. So we're going to put it in the state folder. So let's create another folder in here for authenticators. And I know Authenticator is kind of a weird name, but I feel like it kind of covers this topic. There might be better names out there, but we're doing our best. That's what's important. And this is going to be the Authenticator interface. And we'll make this public. And let's go over those things that we want to add. So we are going to have a user, which is the current user of the application. And it's just going to be a getter because this is going to be set internally by the Authenticator. We don't want any other classes or modules to mess with this current user. And then we're going to have a bool for is logged in, so we can see if there is a current user logged in. And again, that's just going to be a getter, probably going to be a calculated property as well. And then we are going to have our authentication methods. So these are going to be async, of course, and our register method is going to return that registration result that we implemented in our authentication service. And this is going to be register, and it's just going to pretty much match that method signature in our authentication service because it's going to be calling that service. So let's get our email, username, and password, and confirm password. And then same thing with the login method, except this is going to return a bool because we want the LoginViewModel, or the LoginCommand, anyone who calls the Authenticator, we want them to know if the login was successful or not. So we're just going to return a bool here, call this login. It's going to take the username and the password. And last but not least, we're going to have a log out. And I'm not actually sure if I want this to be async or not. I don't think I do, at least for now. So I'm just going to make this a void and log out. I mean, I could even argue to make this return like a bool, true, false for success. But I feel like we're safe just making this a void log out, and it'll just succeed every single time, depending on how we implement logout. And we'll see in just a second. So now that we have our interface, let's go ahead and implement this interface. And we're just going to call this an authenticator. And one thing to note is, I know it's kind of crazy to just right off the bat create interfaces for all this, but we have established the fact that we are going to be doing some unit testing. So it is important to interface these services and this state so that we can mock them in unit tests. Let's go ahead and implement this authenticator like that. Implement the interface. And we can actually close out of this UML for now. Okay. So our current user, this is going to be just a getter, and we're going to set a private set because we're going to be able to set this current user from within the authenticator. And then for is logged in, what I'm going to do here is make this a calculated property. And what it's going to do is if the current user, it's going to be if the current user is null, or no, if the current user does not equal null, then that means that we have a current user and we are logged in. That's a little bit difficult for me to wrap my head around for some reason, but that makes sense. If the current user does not equal null, then we have a current user and we are logged in. Okay. So now we just have to implement the rest of these methods. So we have login, and we're really not going to do much here because we are going to delegate that to our authentication service. Let's go ahead and actually bring that up. I think that's actually in our domain layer, authentication services. look at the interface. So we're going to delegate those methods to our authentication service, and to do that we're going to have to pass that authentication service through our constructor. So let's go ahead and create a field up here for the authentication service. We'll just call it authentication service, and then we're going to select all that and generate a constructor for it. So we're going to get that through the constructor. That's probably going to be injected through dependency injection. And now that we have that, all we have to do is execute the login on the authentication service. So we're going to log in, pass these same method parameters right here, the username and the password. And of course this is async, so we're going to have to await that, and that actually returns an account. So let's get that account. And now that we have that, I actually realized that we kind of messed something up here. This isn't going to be a user, this is going to be an account. So it's going to be the current account. That's what we really need to be able to do all of our operations that require authentication. So let's go ahead and update that. It's going to be the account, current account. Let's change that down there. And while we're here, we actually don't need to put this into a local variable. We can just set our current account like that. And there we go. Now, of course, this login method actually throws exceptions if the login failed. So we're going to wrap this in a try catch, because we do not want anyone who calls this authenticator to have to handle these exceptions, because anyone who calls this just needs to know if it was successful or not. They don't need to know about the specific exceptions that were thrown. So all we're going to do is create a boolean up here for success, and what we're going to do is return that once we're done with the method. And if there was an exception, we'll set success to false, but otherwise, if everything worked out, there was no exceptions, we'll set it to true. And actually a better way to do this is just set it to true by default, and if there's exceptions, then we'll set it to false. That makes more sense. So that is our login method. We log in and we set the current account, and then this is logged in will be true as well. Now for log out, all I'm going to do for this is actually just set the current account to null, and that will set is logged in to false, so essentially we'll be logged out. And last but not least, we just have to create our register method, and this one is going to be super simple. So all we're going to do here is return the result of using our authentication service, because our authentication service, the method signature is exactly the same, and we can just return the registration results straight from this authentication service after passing in all of these parameters. And there we go. So that is our authenticator. That is going to handle the account authentication for our WPF project. So now that we have that set up, we can create a view model that uses the authenticator. So let's go in here and let's create a new item, and there we go. We got the login view model, and we can make that public, and it's going to use the ViewModel base. So it's going to be a ViewModel base which pretty much just has our iNotify property changed implementation. And while we're here, let's actually create a login view as well. So this is going to be a user control and login view. There we go. And while we're here, we should just do all the plumbing to set up a new view. So in our app.xaml, let's create a data template for our login view model, and we're going to map that to a login view. So the view model is login view model, login view, like that. So that's all good. And another thing we have to do is update our Navigator as well, so that we can navigate to this view model, or to this view. So let's go to our Navigator, And I think the interface has all the view types, so we're going to have a login view type. And then we're going to have to update our Viewmodel factories as well. So I believe our root simple trader Viewmodel factory takes in that create Viewmodel for the specific view type. So we're going to have to update that switch statement. So here we go. So if the case is viewType.login, then we are going to return a login Viewmodel. Now we don't have one yet, and we're going to have to create a factory for that login Viewmodel. So let's go ahead and do that. Login Viewmodel factory. And we'll make that public, and it's going to be the usual simple trader Viewmodel factory for a login Viewmodel. Let's implement that interface, and all it's going to do for now is just return a new login Viewmodel like that. And we don't have any dependencies set up to pass through this constructor yet, but we'll get to those in just a second. So now in here we can add that Viewmodel factory for the login Viewmodel like that, and we'll have to get that through the constructor. So we can add parameters. There we go. And let's put that onto the line. And then we just have to register all of this with our dependency injection container. Let's actually add the login Viewmodel factory create right here. And then we're done in this class. So let's go back up to our dependency injection container. And all we have to add is a singleton for our login Viewmodel factory. And there we go. And while we're here, we should actually register our Authenticator with the dependency injection container as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Same thing as the Navigator, we're going to register it as scoped. And we already went over singleton versus scope, so we're just going to leave it at that. So now we got everything registered, and now we just need to actually go back to our login Viewmodel and start implementing that. So let's close out all this. So what is our login Viewmodel going to have? It's going to have to get a username from the user, and it's also going to have to get a password from the user, and it's going to have to supply a command to the user so that the user can actually log in. So let's add a prop change, and this is going to be a string for the username. And you might actually think that we would do a prop change for a string password, but we're actually not, because there's a bit of a quirk with password boxes in MVVM, WPF. You can't actually bind to the value of the password box, so we're going to have to provide the password a little bit differently. So we're going to skip password for now, and last but not least, we're just going to have a property for a command that will allow a user to log in. So it's going to be an iCommand login command. And we haven't actually made that yet. So that's going to be our next thing. And this doesn't need to have a setter as well. We can just make it a getter. So in this constructor, we're going to set that login command to a new login command, which we have not created yet. So in our commands, let's create this new item, and we're going to call this the login command, of course. Let's make it public and just implement iCommand right now, like that. And there we go. So it can execute. We're just going to set that to true for now. And then we just have to implement this execute method. So what we're going to do here is call that login method on our authenticator. So let's bring up the authenticator real quick. We can just look at the interface. So we're going to have to get one of those in our login command. So we're going to take that through the constructor. Let's create a field for the Authenticator. Like that. And then we can import the authenticator and get that through the constructor. And then what we're going to do in this execute command is we're actually going to just try and log in the user. So we're going to put that into a success flag and just call Authenticator.login, and we're going to have to get that username and password. So the username, of course, is on the LoginViewModel. So let's get that through the constructor as well. So we'll create a field for it, the LoginViewModel, import that, and let's actually just ditch this old constructor and generate a new one with these new fields, like that. So now that we have our LoginViewModel, we can get the username from there, but then we have to get this password from somewhere, and we will handle that in just a second once we start building out our view and all that. So now that we have that, let's actually make this async so that we can call await. And of course, async void is okay in this situation because our login method isn't going to throw exceptions. Although we might actually wrap this in another try catch just to make sure. And before we leave this login command, let's just set a string.empty as the password for now so that we can compile and actually test this out, make sure we can execute the command and all that. So let's go back to our LoginViewModel. We can now create a login command, and this login command is going to take the LoginViewModel, that's just this, but it's also going to need an authenticator, and we can get that through our LoginViewModel constructor. And now that we have that, we can just pass it in like that. And now we need to go back to our LoginViewModel Factory. And of course, we need an authenticator to create this LoginViewModel. So let's get that through our constructor as well. And this will all work out because we registered this LoginViewModel Factory with our dependency injection container. And we also have an authenticator registered in dependency injection as well. So we'll get the authenticator, and all we got to do is just pass it in like that. And there we go, we're good to go. And now we just got to create a view for this view model. So let's go into our login view, and what I'm going to do is make this super simple for now. So we're going to have a few rows in here. So we're going to have a row for the username. Let's make these height auto. We're going to have a row for the password, and we're going to have a row for the login button. And then we're going to have two columns as well. So we're going to have a column for basically a label that says username or password, and that's just going to be auto. And then we're going to have another column for the actual input text box, and that's going to be auto as well. So let's go ahead and throw those in this view. Again, we're not trying to make this super pretty, but let's have a text block for username, and this is going to go in the first row and the first column, and then next to that, so in column 1, we're going to have a text box, and this text box is going to bind to the username on our view model, and it's going to have an update source trigger of onPropertyChange. So whenever this text changes in this text box, it's automatically going to send it up to our view model immediately. And now in our other columns, let's go ahead and just copy this. We're going to have a text box, and this is going to be for the password. Let's move all of these down a row. And we're not actually going to have a binding for this yet, and this is going to be a password box actually. And while we're here, we're going to have to give it a name because we're going to have to do some special things with this because we cannot bind a password value to a view model. Very sad. But we'll just call this PB password. And let's get rid of this binding. And last but not least, we are going to have a button, and this is going to go in the last row. It's going to span across both columns, so we're going to try and center it. So we'll specify centering, horizontal alignment as well. And the command for this is going to be the login command on our LoginViewModel. So I think that is actually everything for a simple view, and the last thing we need to do is make sure that we start on this login view when we start the application. So that is, I believe, in our main view model. Let's go ahead and make that log in. And now let's go ahead and try this out. And we have build errors. Let's see, that's actually in our XAML. So where is this? Okay, so we lost a little closing bracket there. That's all good. I like bugs like that. That was pretty simple. Alright, so here we go. We are on our beautiful login view. Let's give this button some content, and we'll just call it login. So this is going to need a lot more work. I'm not going to mess with it right now though, because we're just testing functionality. But while we're here, before we start doing anything, let's go to our login command and put a breakpoint here and make sure we get the username from the LoginViewModel, and actually just make sure that we even hit this breakpoint in the first place. So let's type in a username. So we'll type in Singleton Sean, and the password, we're just not going to have anything for now because we're not really doing anything with it. So let's log in, and we do hit this breakpoint. Okay. So before we can actually test a real user, we're going to have to fix this password issue. So we can't bind the password, and the only way to really get the password to our command is to pass it through this parameter. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So now let's go back to our login view, and you might be thinking, okay, we can just set the command parameter, bind it to the PasswordBox password, but that actually will not work either. The only way to really get this password from the PasswordBox is to grab it in the code behind. So that means we're going to have to call our command from the code behind as well. So we're not going to call it here. We're going to have a click handler. So create a new event handler, and now we have this method in our code behind that's going to get executed when we click the button. So what we're going to want to do when we click this button, let's actually rename it to a better name, login click, is get the password from the password box. So that is simple. We can call it pbpassword.password like that. Put that in the variable. And then we need to execute our login command. Now we don't have the login command right now, and the best way to get it is through a dependency property. So if you guys are unfamiliar with dependency properties, I recommend you look at my dependency property video, and specifically my video on how to turn any event into a WPF command. I think that would be a very helpful video to watch if you're confused with this part. But this is going to be an I command, and we're going to call this the login command, and the owner class is going to be this login view, and by default the value is going to be null. And let's clean this up a little bit. I like to move my dependency properties to the top. I should probably just fix my snippet, but that'll do for now. And now that we have this login command, we are going to first make sure it's not null. So we need to make sure that it actually has a command binded to. And if it's not null, then we are simply going to execute the command and pass in that password that we have here. So let's move that up here like that. There we go. So now we are logging in with our password. But the last thing we need to do is actually bind this login command to our login view. And that is going to be in our app.xaml here. So our login view now has this login command, and the binding for that is just going to be the login command on our LoginViewModel, which we conveniently have right here. So we can just go ahead and bind it. So now we can test this out, and let's just put a breakpoint right here. And let's see, do we have any other breakpoints? Oh, we actually need to pass in that password to this login method. So our parameter is going to be the password string. So let's call parameter.toString and pass that password into the login method. And while we're here, let's put a breakpoint at the end of this login, and let's give this a go. So I do actually have a user in the database, Singleton Sean, and I had to go back and look at an old video because I completely forgot the password. But we have test123, and let's try this out. So we are executing. We get our password, test123, there we go, from our password box. And now when we continue, we're doing the login, and success is true. So we have successfully logged in, and now we have this authenticator successfully managing our authentication state, which we can use anywhere in our application. So that is actually where I'm going to wrap up this video. Of course, our login view is disgusting. Our login command could do a little bit more, like redirecting the user. We might actually want to hide this navigation bar if the user is not logged in, but we'll handle that in future episodes. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, criticisms, or concerns, be sure to leave them below in the comment section. But if you enjoyed the video or learned something new, be sure to leave a like or subscribe for more. Thank you.